He walked beside me shivering. I was warm in my new wool. He was jittery and wounded. I was calm. My stomach was full. He complained about his mother. I sang the praises of my wife. His journey was just beginning. I was at the end of my life.
Welcome to The Fix. Sit down with copywriting experts Nick O'Connor and Glenn Fisher as they review, discuss, and improve real-world copy sent in by you. This is The Fix.
That was a poem called At Night in Cherry Creek by the poet Mark Ford. Mark Ford also, who is our guest on today's episode, is otherwise known as a copywriter, a legend, dare I say, without sounding too hyperbolic, which we'll get into at some point. But he is a legend in the copywriting industry, and it's an absolute pleasure to have him on the show. Mark, hello. How are you doing?
Glenn, great to hear you again. It's great to see you. And once again, I want to thank you for this fantastic coffee cup, which I'm using right now. Yeah. The better half, as I understand it.
She is the far more creative one. We'll get onto creativity today. Thank you very much, and I will pass the compliments on to Ruth. They've been very successful. The mugs we did for Fix Fest. They've made their way around the world, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do to follow up this year, but we'll see. But no, I opened the show with a poem, and you were kind enough to give me a copy of this book many years ago, and made it out to a fellow poet, which was kind. The reason I thought about doing that is because I've watched and listened to countless interviews with Mark, and always valuable, always interesting, but they all tend to straight into that copywriting and that like the hardcore stuff of copywriting, which is cool and great. But I thought always like to be different, so I thought I'd actually come in from what I don't think gets talked about as much in the interviews I hear with you, Mark, is your kind of artistic influences and that kind of other side to your life of the poetry, of the art. I know you're a big collector of art. You're interested in all that stuff. I wondered if you could just tell us, begin, and we'll work back to kind of copy. What are your artistic influences? What kind of makes you tick? What inspires you to go and write poetry and collect art and do all of that kind of side of things?
Well, I guess I would have to say that one obvious influence of my family. My mother was, she was, among other things, she was a lyricist. She wrote lyrics for Broadway New York musicals as a part-time job. And my father was a Shakespearean scholar, so I grew up in a family that was, half of my siblings are in drama, in theater, and the other half are in either education or so. It was always a big influence in my house, whether it was when we were young. In fact, before we were allowed to go out and play on the weekends, we had to memorize a poem. And that was a requirement of my mother's. And it was a great idea in retrospect. I mean, I was always anxious to get out, and we could pick our own poems. And I tried to go the limerick route once, but she was onto that. So but I tried to do the shortest poems I could, but eventually this is how you appreciate anything that's artistic. You expose yourself to it, and eventually it seeps in. And I think that happened. It made me love poetry, which made me love the literary aspects of reading literature, and then we did have this art thing. This my mom put up our entire house. Well, there were 8 children, so there were 10 of us in a 4-bedroom house, and there were always framed artwork around, but of course none of them were real. They were just basically photocopies of master artwork. so I did have that advantage, I would say, of growing up, and my my mother was always correcting our pronunciation of foreign words and so on. So it's that kind of environment, and I think because that was my early exposure, one of my secret desires when I was young was to somehow figure out how to be a writer when I became an adult. I mean, in our family, like, there's no greater admiration than you have for artists. That's how we grew up, in that kind of family. My parents, because of my mother's situation, we had relatively famous actors and writers and so on in our house on a regular basis. And since my parents looked up to these people, I naturally did too. And so I think, so there was that. I do tell the story when I finally decided to make something of myself financially. I had to identify. This was the Dale Carnegie thing. I won't tell it so many times. I won't tell it again. But I had too many goals, and I finally got them down to 3, which was writing, teaching, and getting rich. And I decided that I would. I had to pick one, and it was nerve-wracking because I felt like in picking one, I would be eliminating the others. And there's a great deal of truth in that, to tell you the truth. And as I was walking up to the front of the room where we held our weekly meetings to tell everybody when my number one goal was going to be, the thought occurred to me that, well, why don't you get rich first, and then you could somehow pay for your fantasies of becoming a writer. Yeah, once I made a decision that my priority was going to be to accumulate wealth, then my job as the editorial director of this publishing company became clear to me, and that I would no longer pay attention to some aspects of the editorial, like how clever it was, for example, and pay more attention to the impact it had on the readers. I realized my job was not to make our publications prettier, in my version of pretty, but to make our readers enjoy them more, so they would renew. It's in a sense, it's the decision was the opposite of writing poetry. If you're going to be a poet, you're except if you live for a brief period of time in a Latin American country and you're writing socialist poetry, you're not going to get paid for your poetry, and you're doing it for yourself, and you're your audience, and it's a solitary endeavor, and but it certainly could be worthwhile if you enjoy the work and you think it's valuable. But copywriting is the opposite. That what you realize is that your job as a copywriter, or in this case, I was the editorial director, creating the content of a publishing business, was to create intellectual products that were really exciting and stimulating for people. And that was, once I had that thought, I realized that's my responsibility. I have to give up this idea of precious me and become a servant of my reading public, and because they were paying my salary and they knew what they wanted. And so that was a big education for me, to move away from the singularity of believing I knew what was best for people, to recognizing that I was working for these people, and that I had to act accordingly. I had to, in some fundamental way, give them what they were paying me for. And there's a lot more to the story than that, but I think that is a key shift that writers who want to make money as a living, whether you're a copywriter or you're writing content you have to be humble enough to accept the fact that the people that are listening to you are paying your salary, and your job is to be devoted to them. Now, it doesn't mean at all that your job is to pander to them at all. So that was a big eye opener for me, and it led me to be able to produce products and write copy for products that brought our business from, practically less than $1 million to $135 million in 11 years. And that's hardly the end of the story. It was the beginning of my education, and we could talk forever about it, but if you're going to do good work, you have to start by recognizing that you're working for your reading public. And
I'm interested. There's two things that I'm interested in pulling out there, because I've got my own secret agenda with it as well. But I'm really interested in when you mentioned about your mother making you memorize poetry and which is an incredible skill for one. But that reminds me so much of the way I learned copy under your tutelage, really, and the rote learning idea, and the fact of going over it again and echoing a voice and taking it on almost inherently, that you read out copy, you don't. I think one of the first tasks in the old AWAI course was I remember specifically it saying, write out the copy, but don't think about how you're doing it, just do it. Right. Then we can go back and actually think about what's going on. Just that inherence, taking. It feels like that formed your kind of understanding it as well.
Glenn, that's a very good point. And the classic, i.e., ancient Greek way of teaching was through this mimetic, just repeating things that you didn't understand quite. And I think that that's incredibly important, because the stuff that is the most sophisticated stuff in writing, in playing music and appreciating art, it's not obvious to you when you begin. And you can read people's explanation of what makes this work or what makes it doesn't work, jazz, for example. But unless you have an ear for it, unless you develop an ear for it, you'll never really understand it, and you'll never be able to reproduce it. I think it's a big subject that people haven't talked about. But when you think about rote learning poetry, there's a lot there that you learn when you read and memorize enough poems that is not obvious. Surely wouldn't be aware of when you would just start, if you took a Poetry 101. For example, near rhymes. Near rhymes are a very important part of poetry, but they're not something that people normally understand. And not just, of course you can learn what a near rhyme is, but how it's employed and where it has power. The pacing of poetry, the way a poem scans is so critical. And so these are very sophisticated things that have a big impact on the reader, the appreciator of the poem, or the book, or the copy, for that matter. But it's too, the beginner can't, he's not ready for that yet. But somehow by the process of copying, reading, saying it out loud, copying it, the more physical experience you can have with something that's at the moment beyond your capability of performing, the more you're learning these subtle, in some cases subliminal, call them what you will, these subtle things that will make a difference. And the difference they make is more powerful copy. But it's also subtler, and it's also less direct. It's more sophisticated. It's the kind of thing that eventually, if you want to be, the master copywriters have these qualities. They don't need to always be doing the most obvious things. they don't need to continue to write copy like they're writing Dick and Jane books, and when competition gets tough, as it has in our industry in the last couple of years, that kind of obvious copywriting that's hitting the big strokes but missing on the little ones, it just doesn't work. And if you don't have those other skills, you're going to have a hard time.
Exactly. Well, that kind of pivots quite nicely to when I thought about, right, okay, where is this kind of what do we learn from the artistic side, the poetry side? And when I picked up your book and was looking through, and I thought, what's really going on here when I look at a poem, for example, is the drama in it, the drama in more artistic literature, if we like, is often quieter. It's inherent, it's felt, it's emotional, it's all of the things that we often preach in copy and how you should do it. It's certainly the more experienced people will advise that. But I thought that's quiet, that's there. And something that me and Nick always are advising, so many copywriters come to us going, oh, we want to do, and it's all hyperbole, it's all shouting, it's all of that. It's trying to force drama on an idea rather than finding the drama in the idea and expanding on that and expressing that. And I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. I wonder, what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm putting words in your mouth, but I know one of your beliefs is there is a bit too much hyperbole in the copywriting world today. How do you think that, what does that make you think of when I kind of use it?
I think that's a very good observation. Here's one way to think of it. And it's kind of fun, funny, I'm not sure. When I'm dealing with copywriters that have been very successful using hyperbole, it's hard for them to understand why it doesn't work anymore. And the image I have is when the market, whatever market, or imagine yourself in front of a sideshow, where there's inside there's the hairy person, the fat person, whatever, and people are very enthused for this kind of thing. If you want to bring people in, you have to shout, and you have to, or even I've been in the streets of London, and they do that too. You're going by music stores or whatever, and people are. And so when the audience is already enthused, then shouting and making big claims will definitely work. That they already believe the idea, and so that stuff works. But most of the time, I mean, I've been in the business 40 plus years, and there have been maybe a total of 6 or 7 years where there was that kind of belief in the marketplace. The rest of the time, it wasn't there. There was more of a reticence, a perfectly good reluctance to go to believe wholeheartedly in any idea. And so that's what the market mostly consists of. And so when people have that type of skepticism, curiosity, but skepticism, then what happens is when all you're doing is this very thin, very obvious shouting and screaming, they just recoil. I mean, it's we would do that, like I say, you do it in any kind of mercantile environment, walking on the street, somebody's you just pull back, or if somebody comes to your door, knocks on your door, and then they start shouting out, biblical phrases and trying to, walk into your house, you shut the door on them. So what do we do in those other times? How do you bring someone in that is that may not even be shopping for what you're doing? And the way you do that is through all these things that are that I talked about in the lead book, the book I wrote with John Ford, which is you have to move from direct copy to indirect copy. You have to, direct copy is making promises and making huge claims and so on. But indirect copy, you're doing, there's archetypes. This was our argument. Basically, the three archetypes, you can tell a secret, you can tell a story, or you can actually, I don't remember how I expressed it, or you can convey a fact to them that maybe through a prediction that is intrinsically interesting. So what you're doing in these three cases is the same thing. You're taking an approach that is directly contrary to barking, the barker, the carnival barker. And instead, you're doing something. You're conveying, you're giving your audience a form of entertainment and education that we have used for millennia to educate ourselves, to create beliefs, to create communities, and so on. And the most powerful way, in my mind, without question, is the story, telling the story. But at the moment, if a copy begins with a story, the reader is in the story. The reader reads it if it's a good. The title has to be good. The beginning has to be good. But the great, the most successful examples of copy that begin with stories, the stories themselves are very intriguing. I worked for years with I worked for months on order Stansbury's first piece, because trained across America, and it was a story package, and we worked so hard on making that it felt like we were writing the beginning of a movie. And when you do that, what happens, this is very, very key, is the moment your reader forgets or decides that he's not listening to a salesman, he opens up. And then what happens is he's following the story, and he is experiencing the story almost as if it's his own life, right? How many things have we come to believe in our lives because we've had stories, either books or in movies, that have told us about oppression or about a scarcity or about whatever it is, that we come to deeply believe, but we never actually experienced them, except in direct. And there have been plenty of, I don't want to go viral, but plenty of studies that have shown you that the brain actually can't distinguish between stories it's read or watched and experiences it's had, believe it or not. We don't have that capacity. So that's what's so powerful about being able to do these things, is that you don't have to convince the person. You just structure it right. And before you ever get to presenting the product, they already believe it. And they believe it in a deep way. And then the rest of it is very easy.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well,
so that
I'm interested there. You mentioned about the Railroad Across America promo, and that's a great example of that storytelling thing. I'm going to ask you an impossible question, but I'll ask it anyway. But I don't expect you to be able to give a concise answer by any means. But I think it's interesting to kind of skirt around it. The ultimate question is, how do you figure out which of those stories are the one to take? You mentioned there working with Porter on on that particular one, you're spending quite a lot of time figuring out how do you begin, shall we say, to look at a story and go, right, there's something here. It's not quite right. How do I express this in a way that gets the reader that gets them to that deeper understanding?
Right. Okay, well, there may be other answers to this. The credit is to Porter pick the story, and he did it, I'm sure, because he did what I would advise. It's the only way I think you can do this. What you have to do is a lot of reading on the subject matter, and what you really want to do, this again, we're talking kind of at a master's level instead of this basic stuff that everybody teaches. So you can learn a lot from reading good promotions and so on. But when it comes time to writing a promotion, you have to read serious stuff, and you have to read books that are written by experts in the subject matter you're talking about. And if those books are good books, especially the best-selling books, these people are masters at telling stories and my rule is just keep reading until you come upon a story that motivates you, where that's all you need. A trust that if that story excites you, it'll excite someone else. You don't have to, it's not like, this is the good part. It's not like you need to spend 3 years learning how to do that. You already know how to do it because we've all spent countless thousands of hours in enjoying stories, whether we're reading them or watching them. So my answer is trust yourself. But if you're not willing to do the work, if you're not willing to read the serious writing from the serious people on this subject, then you'll never find those stories. But if you are, you just, the one that you're excited about, that's the one to go with.
Yeah,
that's my.
It's funny, as you say. It's like it's ironic because you say like it's master level copywriting, and I agree wholeheartedly. What I think the mastering element is mastering the discipline of being able to do that. I can imagine people out there going, "All right, yeah, okay, I just keep reading and think." But I had an experience of that the other day where I was like, right, I've got my rough idea. I know where I am, but I'll keep reading and I'll keep digging down and I'll keep digging down. At one point, I found one piece of research. I actually, again, to give credit where credit's due, Nick turned around and went, that's the story. Like, what the hell is that? Like, that's the line. And it was like, oh, right, bring that back up. It's that bit where you go, all right, okay. Where am I? Okay, I'm roughly there, and you do know when it comes. Right. Having the discipline, I think, in what you're talking about there is to do that work, to dig down, to find that story out, then having a bit of trust in yourself, maybe, to, as you say, when you're excited by it, that's cool. That's when you should go for it, or surround yourself with other successful people who are able to go, that's the story there. Let's, like, you've done your work there. Let's stop and talk about
that. Absolutely. But you're right. Which you have to be willing to do the work. If all your research is just leaving you kind of in a muddled state, then you're not going to get good promotion out of it. You got to keep going. One of the observations that was made to me by actually my own son, who's become a successful copywriter, is that one of his little tricks is he says he doesn't do any research on the internet because he knows everybody else is going on the internet and they're all coming up with the same old things. And if there is a story that's been told 100 times on the internet before, he just goes to the library and picks out books written by experts. And I thought that is really smart because especially if you go read people that are not just experts, but expert storytellers or even best-selling authors that tackle serious subjects, because they're doing the work for you and they know how to. If you're talking about Malcolm Gladwell or any of the popular writers that cover topics, ideas, they know how to tell stories. They also know how to identify facts that are in and of themselves very persuasive. Like, I've been thinking about this book I've been writing about. It's the rough title is, what if they won't change? What if they don't change? Something like that. And it's because I was looking at addiction. I was looking at crime. I was looking at marriage statistics and so on. And I came across numbers that were just crazy, that I didn't realize that the success rate of addiction centers is so low that it kind of shocked me, and it got me thinking, geez, there's something here. I mean, if only 6% of the people are actually succeeding with this, why are we spending billions and billions of dollars? There's got to be a better way. Or a piece of data I saw the other day was that of divorces, 80% of the divorces are initiated by women, not men. I thought that was shocking. I'm probably naive, but it just that the terrible little guys that are doing. So anyway, when you come across a fact that's surprising and it has a lot of energy to it, because for me, to give you an example, this fact would be very strong if I were writing a book. I was selling a book or selling a course that was to men, obviously, about relationships, about how to have a good relationship. And there are other statistics too that could really scare the hell out of them. Like most of them, as a very large percentage of women initiate divorce, they already have another relationship. And by the way, that other relationship is almost always with a person that's taller than you, richer than you, wears better shoes than you. So like you put those three facts together and you've got a lot of emotional stuff going on. I don't know what it means. I'm not taking a position on it, but I'm trying to illustrate that that great stories and powerful facts are they're the key to making emotions work.
I agree entirely. It reminds me a lot. You were saying about I presume it's Mike, the son, reading beyond the internet. I think is a huge boon to anybody copywriter if they want to give themselves an edge. I do a thing. I'm a sucker for kind of cool looking non-fiction books. There's always that kind of thing with an interesting title. I just read one recently called "The Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs," and it was all about kind of identity, giving you away your identity online kind of books, all that kind of stuff. It was someone's PhD, you could kind of tell, but they'd done so much research into it.
Right.
Written in an engaging way. They'd written it in stories. That it was like it was like 12 like promos without a CTA at the end kind of thing in one.
Right.
And I called them books. I said to Nick, I emailed him, was like, "Oh, I've just read this great book." I said, it's an absolute promo source. It's like, there's so much stuff in it that if I wanted to pull that idea out, I could do that. Yeah. Almost none of it will be online. Like it will be in watered down form, but getting those pure ideas, looking for that, I absolutely agree. It's somewhere you should really kind of dig down and go for. I was struck, Mark, when you were speaking then, this, obviously it's the classic copywriter cliche, and the answer is always, because we're curious. But I wondered, you have been in the game so long, but you're obviously still writing all the time. You're still researching. You're still looking for interesting things. What drives that? Why? Like, why not?
I get that question a lot.
But but what drives it, and what is it about that like keeps you going? Because it's the same with you. It's the same with Bill Bonner, who obviously had a big influence on our lives. I've still to this day say, read these men because they just do it anyway. But I'm just, why? What keeps you going?
Okay, well, I have been thinking about that. Not that I have my own theory, and that is that there. When you think about having a good life experience when you're older, like I am, and you're thinking back on the things you remember that please you, when you think back on the really good times in your life that you most value when you look back, and a lot of them weren't by any means the easiest, and they often, and they weren't times when you were like, floating in cash or anything. There's something else going on there, and yet you remember those as great times. And even while you were going through them, they were great times in many ways. They were work, but they were. So the three things that I decided were the three most had common elements were working, learning, and sharing. Or you could say work, working, learning, and teaching, but I don't say sharing because it's little. I think that if any time that a person is working hard and making some progress on an objective that he thinks has value, that's a form of sustainable pleasure, deep and sustainable pleasure. It's not pleasure like deep and sustainable pleasure like an orgasm, but it's something else. It's a kind of a psychic. It feels more Zen to me. So, but the critical factor is that you have to believe that what you're doing has value. You know, if you're working for business that you think makes shitty products and or you don't care about them, then you're going to be miserable. But the moment you do, and so now that is part of what I do. I spend a lot of my days still, at least 6 hours, which is probably half of my working day, writing, and that is as long as I'm writing about things that are important to me that I think have value, and it's a pleasure. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to say I would love to spend a month like right here in my new offices. I have this. I always have my offices in warehouses, and we're going to have more room upstairs than I thought. I thought about putting a little bedroom in there, and then just telling us, telling my family that I'm going off for a month to some strange country or something, but just locking myself in here and doing nothing but reading, researching, writing, and for me, for when the kind of writing I do is meant to share, much of the writing I do, share what I've learned. So I think that's what's going on for me. It's the things that are fun are, working hard at something that has value, learning about something that has value. I mean, just think of this or any of your race as you go through your days, when you're studying something that, whatever it is, if you're into surfing or if you're into astronomy and you're reading a good article and you're realizing you get in a little bit further. It's so exciting, so satisfying, and it lasts forever because you now learn something. So, working, learning, and then for me, it's sharing. Whatever it is that you've accumulated that has value, when you're sharing your material goods or your knowledge, those things are sustainable pleasures. So the reason I think that I keep doing it is because everything else is just not as much fun, and
I'm going to play therapist for a minute, but I hope there's going to be a diagram somewhere in this in your next book, Mark. But we began this conversation when you went out there in the world and doing the Dale Carnegie stuff. You had three things, which were writing, teaching, and getting rich. Your three things now are effectively writing, teaching, and sharing. I don't know how that works or interprets, but there's some...
why not, right? Because luckily, sharing is a pleasure. Because what's the point if you accumulate anything, whether it's wealth or knowledge, and then you're all by yourself? It's a yin and the yang of life. You accumulate things that you think have value, and then you give them away, and people enjoy them. So
that's brilliant. Well, I think on that note, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm going to call it that. I could talk for hours to you, and there's so much stuff. I've got lists of things, but I'm going to stop because I think it's such a nice. There's so many little bits in there that I think people should listen to and take on board, because it does come down to the discipline of finding those ideas, but also just on a bigger, without being too twee or philosophical or whatever, but that trying a good copy will come from you being enjoying it, find an idea, getting involved and going, just the production of the copy in itself will be exciting. I'm writing a promo at the moment. I've had that same kind of I don't really care if it worked. I do care if it did and made money, but I enjoy the production of going, look at this thing that I've created, weirdly holding a baby as though it is my that fun and that enjoyment. that hopefully is what makes good copy. That hopefully there's a high correlation between good copy and that experience. And I think if people take that away, listen to this again and go, that's what my thoughts saying.
I would say trust yourself. You may be a white belt or a blue belt in copywriting per se, but you're a black belt already in recognizing exciting ideas, exciting facts, exciting stories. So you're just as good as any of the best copywriters. So trust that part of you. That will be your strongest tool in your tool belt at the time.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right, Glenn. Great. Always great to talk to you. Let's do it again.
If you enjoy The Fix and want to get access to even more good stuff, join the Fix Accelerator today. Get access to special masterclasses from Nick and me, watch expert interviews with industry legends, join live copy feedback sessions every week, and get connected to our very own private copy network. Visit thefixaccelerator.com for more information.